So thank you so much for joining me tonight. My name is Dr. Corinne Green, and I think that's the first conference that I've been to where I've actually been able to say it's Dr. Corinne Green. So I am associated with the School of Education at the University of Wollongong, along with Sharon Tyndall-Ford, Associate Professor Tyndall-Ford, I should say, who's one of my supervisors, as well as Associate Professor Michelle Eadie, who is also here with us, waving our ISSOTL flags. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I work, rest and play, which is the Darawal speaking peoples. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging who are the knowledge holders and teachers, and I acknowledge First Nations people's continued spiritual and cultural connection to country here and wherever you are calling in from. And I'd also like to formally thank the 23 teachers and school leaders who took the time to speak with me and to share their experiences. And it's through those interviews that this presentation is based on. So as I mentioned, here's a link to the copy of the slides if you would like to collect them. Today I'm going to be presenting part of my PhD research, which is exploring teachers and school leaders' motivations to work with universities. I've been able to share various aspects of this research at previous ISSOTL conferences, as well as through some publications, so there's a chance that you might be familiar with some of my work. Back in 2018, in Norway, I presented the findings of my systematic literature review, and then in 2019 in Atlanta, Georgia, talked about one of the cases that had been a part of my study. And today I'm going to be delving into a bit more detail into some of the other aspects. So to give you a bit of background and catch you up to speed, as with many disciplines in higher education, there is a perceived divide between theory and practice, which has been seen as a really perennial issue within teacher education. That's the context that I'm working in. And these disconnections have really widespread impacts on university students, industry, and research. Partnerships that capitalise on the expertise of both university academics and school teachers have been implemented to integrate theory with practice. And these collaborative partnerships result in collective wisdom and capitalise on the expertise of various stakeholders and provide students with valuable insights into industry, as well as making connections for all in the profession. When these intentional and deliberate school-university partnerships are collaborative and non-hierarchical in nature, they can be described as operating in what Zeichner terms the third space, where the domains of school and university can intersect. And Zeichner explains how in the third space, boundary crossing becomes the norm, and binary attitudes like teacher versus student or school versus university or theory versus practice can be abandoned. So over the course of the first year of my PhD, I conducted a systematic literature review to provide collective evidence of school-university partnerships within Australia, and this was published in the Asia Pacific Journal of Teacher Education. And I found 40 different partnerships that were reported on in the literature, and these partnerships were primarily involving site-based activities. So university subject tutorials being held on the school site or placements happening in the school setting as well. All of the sources that I looked at discussed the benefits of the partnership for the school, for the university, and for both of them together. And many of them explored the challenges that were encountered as well. But the review identified an important research gap, which is that the motivating factors that underlie and drive the stakeholders' involvement in these partnerships hasn't yet been explicitly explored. And this is where I then turned my attention for the remainder of my PhD. So to do this, I employed a multiple case study design where I had a number of unique cases, which I looked at as schools within school-university partnerships, studying them to understand teachers and school leaders' involvement in these partnerships. Within multiple case study designs, a case quintain view has been advocated by Stake to keep both the details of the case and the big picture, which he terms the quintain, in mind as you go throughout the research process. The main aim is to understand the issue as a whole, and to do that, and that's the quintain, but to understand that through understanding the parts individually, which is the cases. So as I mentioned in previous years and in other publications, I have looked at the case details, and in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the quintain or overall findings. To give you a bit of an insight into these 4 schools and their school-university partnerships that I looked at, I've got just kind of the Cliff Notes version of these cases on the screen for you there. I chose to give them botanical names to the schools and the universities as pseudonyms. But you can see there that we have some that were primary school, one that was high school, one was primary school within a large K-12 school. Most of them were in major cities, with one in an inner regional area. We've got schools in Queensland, Tasmania and New South Wales. One, the Kangaroo Paw High School, the yellow one there, was a very large school, which had implications for their partnership. And two of them were in low socioeconomic status areas, which really, all of these factors really played into the partnerships that they had, as well as what motivated the teachers to be involved in them. Across these partnerships, there were various activities that were a part of the partnership. Things like the pre-service teachers volunteering at the school for a term or perhaps for a whole year, or school students visiting the university for pre-service teachers to teach a lesson and then have that evaluated. There were school teachers that were leading university lectures and tutorials, and there was also a community of practice with school and university staff coming together to learn together as well. So the research question for my PhD was looking at what motivates teachers and school leaders' involvement in school-university partnerships. So I really wanted to understand what is it that drives them to be involved in this, because it is beyond the normal role description of a teacher. So to do this, I had an individual interview with the school executive, like the principal or a deputy principal. It was really the person who said, yes, let's do this. Also had individual interviews with in-school coordinators. It was the person that was generally the main contact between the school and the university and really championed the partnership. And then I also had either group or individual interviews with teachers, who were those that enact the activities of the partnership. And having this range of participants from these different categories enabled me to have a really comprehensive understanding, not just of what the ideal of the partnership was, but what it actually meant on the ground for the teachers involved as well. When it came to analysing the Quintain findings in particular, so when I had gone through and analysed each of the cases individually, and then I came back to look at the Quintain, at those synthesising those whole findings, I actually returned to the raw data and employed a process called close reading. And this is something that I had learned about at a previous ISSOTL conference, in fact. It's a practice that is commonly used in the arts and humanities field, and it involves both stepping back and looking closely at the meaning that's conveyed through language, whether that's spoken or written, conversational or crafted. Close reading, as Manorin talks about, is about paying attention to what was said and how it was said to increase our understanding. So to do this, I returned to the raw data, which were interview recordings and the transcripts of those interviews, and I listened to them all in two different phases, reading with the grain and reading against the grain. So this means that I first listened to the recordings and annotated the transcripts as the participant hoped that I would, trying to understand what they wanted me to see. And then I listened and read against the grain, which is a type of resistance reading, considering the unexamined assumptions, contradictions, or silences of an artifact. This enabled me to interrogate each participant and triangulate assertions to confirm or refute the comments of one participant as being representative of the whole case, and really find the what was said and what wasn't said and how it was said through these interviews. So what did I find? Let's have a look. So through the close reading analysis, three main themes that related to teachers and school leaders' motivation for being involved in a school-university partnership emerged. At a local level, the nature of the specific partnership and the culture of the given school were both prompted and enabled the participants' involvement in the school-university partnerships. And furthermore, participants' sense of commitment to and responsibility for the teaching profession provided a foundation for their involvement in the school-university partnerships, which they believed could lead to profession-wide improvements. So now I want to kind of break those down and look at those individually. So first, looking at the nature of the partnership, there were similarities and differences between these cases and what's present in the research literature, which really demonstrates the wide variety of options available to those who are seeking to establish or maintain contextually relevant school-university partnerships. So I found that there were these differences between the depth, breadth, and multiplicity is how I termed it, of these partnerships themselves. And what I mean by that is that I started to look at how the different partnerships in this that I was looking at differed in terms of their purpose, their activities, their relationships, as well as being influenced by their needs and the capacity of the schools as well. Davis and Samara 2012 discovered that there's no one-size-fits-all or even a one-size-fits-most model for school university partnerships, and that indeed was what I saw here in my data as well. So there were some schools like Grevillea Primary School and Eucalyptus Primary School, the red and green on the left there, where they had a partnership with just one university. And this enabled Grevillea Primary School, for instance, to have really deep connections. The principal at that school said it's about knowing what Grey Gum University wants. The university knows what we want. We know each other's expectations really well and know what we stand for. Others had partnerships with multiple universities in their local area or even internationally, like Kangaroo Paw High School and Bottlebrush Independent School on the right there. The location played a role here. For instance, Bottlebrush Independent School is in the centre of a major city, and they have multiple universities, which one of the teachers talked about being just on our doorstep. So it was that opportunity that their location gave them to feed into these multiple universities, but they also had connections internationally, which were not quite on the doorstep. And then on the vertical axis, you can see the variations in depth of connection. So Eucalyptus Primary School on the broad end had multiple staff with relationships with multiple university academics, but these were somewhat tenuous on their own. So we had lots of things going on, but it perhaps wasn't as deep. Whereas Grevillea Primary School, for instance, were really deeply connected and invested in two main relationships with academics. And it was really key, really evident that there were deep relationships going on there. So in addition to the differences in the depth, breadth and multiplicity across the cases, I also found differences in who initiates and who drives the partnerships. So for Kangaroo Paw High School, it was actually the school that was really driving these, and the school was really seeking out the university and seeking out these partnerships and what more can we do, and really driving it in that sense. For Eucalyptus Primary School, it was the university that was doing a little bit more dictating of that, and sort of coming to the school and asking them to be involved in things. And then for Grevillea Primary School and Bottlebrush Independent School, it really was more of a collaboration and ongoing conversation about how can we be working together in an ongoing sense. Some of the same things that came up across these different cases were the importance of the relationships, and that's the one-on-one relationships between school staff and university staff, but also looking at how an individual at the university, say, may be really responsive and accommodating of any issues that might come up, versus seeing the institution as being quite slow to change. So when things needed to be adapted and needed to be changed, there was a person that might be able to get on that really quickly because they know them, but as an institution, there may be systems and processes that prevent that flexibility. Voluntary participation was also really important for these teachers. Two of the schools had an opt-in system, two of them had an opt-out system, but all of the teachers and school leaders really talked about how there was choice involved and that was really important to their involvement in it. And then the funding was interesting because while there was money needed for some of the activities, on the whole, each partnership in this study operated without significant funding. The in-school coordinator at Grevillea Primary School said, I don't need money because our teachers are the resources, our knowledge is the resource. So it was about building into those people rather than needing funding to make this happen. And the in-school coordinator at Bottlebrush Independent School also said that it's a partnership that to start takes so little. It started with a conversation. So it was, not being held back by needing to wait for funding and things like that, but able to just hit the ground running. Then to have a look at the school culture or the workplace culture. This had a really substantial role to play in motivating the teachers and school leaders to be involved in the school-university partnerships. There were elements such as the school leadership, where we had support from the executive and middle leaders in particular who championed the partnership. The context was important. The partnerships are really sensitive and relevant to the context, as I mentioned with looking at the depth, breadth and multiplicity, really being relevant to this particular context. And it was things like, I mentioned that there were 2 schools that were in areas of low socioeconomic disadvantage, but there were 2 different ways of approaching that. So for Eucalyptus Primary School, that relative disadvantage meant that they were really invested in their school students seeing university as attainable. So the partnership activities that they were involved in really prioritised that for their school students. Whereas at Kangaroo Paw High School, which was also in a low socioeconomic area, they were really saw the value in staffing needs and having those filled with early career teachers who were familiar with the reality of what it means to teach at that school. So they were really invested in the staff and in building up from the pre-service teachers through to early career teachers and on. Other things that were important in terms of the workplace culture were the school philosophy and framework and having synergy and alignment between the school and the university's philosophies and coherence of vision for the partnership. And also the interest in research. So all 4 of these schools identified in their interviews that they were research engaged. And it was unclear about whether it came first that they were interested in research or that they were involved in the partnership. But this element of interest in research really amplified their partnership work and gave opportunities that may not have been there otherwise. And the final key theme that came through the quintain was commitment to the profession. So across all 4 cases, the participants made really clear that they believed it was their professional responsibility to be actively involved, not just in their own school, but the whole teaching profession. They saw the partnership that they were involved in as having these reciprocal benefits that were cyclical. So the partnership activities might include, for instance, professional development for teachers, which leads to higher quality mentoring and professional experience for the pre-service teachers, who are subsequently better prepared for their teaching careers and more likely to succeed as early career teachers, which contributes to school student achievement and school improvement, and so on it goes. They also saw teacher education as being a shared responsibility, and between schools and universities, teachers and teacher educators, we all need to be working together to promote our profession and to ensure quality in our profession. There were also a number of enduring issues that I had identified within the teaching profession that school-university partnerships are able to speak into. So it's things like having quality of pre-service teachers' experiences in schools, connecting theory and practice for pre-service teachers, but also for teachers and for teacher educators. Thinking about the nature of teacher professionalism, where these teachers weren't driven by policy directives or financial incentives, but they had this democratic professionalism approach. And also thinking about teacher attrition and retention across the board. So preparing pre-service teachers, retaining early career teachers, and re-engaging senior teachers. So these enduring issues were things that could be addressed in robust and valuable ways through school-university partnerships and through these collaborations. And that's actually something that I have a forthcoming paper that I'm currently working on to really explore how those enduring issues have been addressed with these partnerships. So throughout this study, it was really clear that teachers and school leaders' motivations for involvement in their respective school-university partnerships were rooted in their commitment to the teaching profession and their supportive school cultures. And these teachers and school leaders were willingly involved in their partnerships, not because they were naive about the demands or they were forced into participation, but because they really believed it was important. And the infrastructure of the schools and the nature of the partnerships mitigated the burdens that may be associated with their involvement, which suggests that any initial friction or reluctance to be working together in partnership might be mediated by demonstrating the possible benefits, building genuine relationships, and proactively addressing issues. The findings of this study also suggest that school-university partnerships can productively address several of the enduring issues within the teaching profession, not as a panacea or a simple solution, but as a robust and contextually relevant collaboration between key players in the profession. So now I want to take the time that is left to think about what it means for you. So if you were to be thinking about your own domain, whether you're in teacher education or some other field, what do these kinds of industry-university partnerships look like? Have you had any experience with them? And how could you start to pursue those? So I'll take the screen down just so that I can see your faces again, but really keen to know what you think about in terms of those elements.
That was a fabulous presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm jealous of some of your visualization moves as well. I'm always so impressed when people can make bubbles happen and all of that. This is just, I mean, I work in a space where we run interdisciplinary projects in partnership with industry, and it hasn't been that kind of local grassroots organisation, which a school in some ways is. And I just wanted to learn a little bit more from you about, it seems like there was such a diversity across these partnerships, but what was the mutual benefit that I know you spoke in terms of research, for example, and value add to the profession, but on a granular, what kind of support or intervention or collaboration, are there some examples of activities that they undertook together?
Yeah, and I think this is where it really comes to the context. It was things like, for instance, one of the schools, so Kangaroo Paw High School, had developed this community of practice where some of the more senior staff at the school were then talking with the academics and really connecting with them. And they were seeing that as an opportunity to develop in higher levels of accreditation. So we have kind of the highly accomplished teachers, and you need to put together a profile and demonstrate your impact in school. So the academics were coming alongside them and helping them to understand, well, what does impact look like and how could you talk about that? And they were talking about the opportunity to have micro-credentials where they might do research projects in the school that could be recognised through certification through the university, that would give the teachers that extra qualification and that opportunity to delve into that kind of professional development in a way that didn't take them out of the classroom. So that was something that was really valuable for the senior teachers in particular, because it was something that gave them a chance to press into their career further and to really try something new without needing to go into an administrative role that might have been the traditional kind of approach.
Thank you, because I find it really interesting looking at what's the horizontal in this. How do we avoid this being a sucking something out and giving? And so that gave me a bit more of the flavour of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it is really about, showing what the possibility is, so they were excited about it rather than, oh, it's another thing we have to do. And that was where having the middle leaders as the champions was really important, because, those in-school coordinators would take tasks off the teachers' to-do list so that it would be an easier transition into doing this, and because they really wanted to see it succeed. Thanks, Elizabeth. Any other questions or comments about what industry partnerships might look like?
Can I have one more then?
Absolutely, go for it.
Well, I love that you looked at leadership, the executive and the teachers and the different kinds of stakeholders. I always wonder if that's even more contentious in the university environment. I've worked in an internship program before where the line between what's done by the professional and the academic is really debated. And I've seen examples where that professional role is really robust and needed, and areas where academics don't have that support, but other times where they don't seem to talk to each other. Was that something you were able to sort of dig into a little bit? Was it very much academic led, or did you see that interaction between the professional academic arm at university too? I'm sure it was different in the context.
Yeah, and I quite intentionally focused on the school setting rather than looking at the university at all, because from the systematic literature review that I had done, I was identifying that the teachers aren't often talked to. So I see this as an opportunity for future research of focusing on what's the motivation for other stakeholders. What's the motivation for the students that are involved when it's a required part of their course, or it's an optional extra, or how does it fit in with their other life commitments and things like that. But also, what are the academics and the university faculty, are I think from memory, each of the relationships that were a part of these partnerships were with an academic university staff member rather than professional staff member. But having said that, I imagine that they have, or at least a few of them would have had professional staff teams that may have supported those activities a bit as well. Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, well, it looks like that might be our time. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been really wonderful to speak with you. And if you're joining from the recording, thank you so much. Oh, and I meant to say I have a final slide that had my contact details, which I had forgotten about. So I'll put my Twitter handle into the chat as well. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I would love to have that conversation with you in an ongoing sense as well. Thank you so much.